Welcome to an episode of Not Minding My Own Business. I am your host, estate planning and elder law attorney Russell Farbiarz, and I'm joined here today by Wendy Seidel from the Greater Reading Mental Health Alliance. So welcome, Wendy.
Hey, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Sure. So Wendy, why don't we get started? Why don't you tell us a little bit about the Mental Health Alliance and what sort of services you're providing to the community?
Sure. So Greater Reading Mental Health Alliance is a relatively small nonprofit organization. We're located in Wyomissing, right across from the Wyomissing Family Restaurant on Penn Avenue. We have about 17 employees here, and we provide a variety of services to the community. We provide certified peer support services. So that's a service where individuals who are they themselves in recovery from a mental health issue are matched with people in the community who need help moving along in their own recovery. And those individuals develop an individual recovery plan and work together on some goals that the peer sets for themselves in the hopes of getting them a little more stable in their own mental health. We also provide educational advocacy for families who have children in any of the school districts in Berks County. We have 3 educational advocates who have lived experience, who they all have children who have some sort of disability and have worked through the special education system. And they work with parents and their children and the school districts cooperatively to make sure that the children are getting whatever services they need and their education as guaranteed by law. We also provide representative payee services. So we work with the Social Security Administration and some other community referral sources for individuals who just can't seem to manage their own money. A lot of them have mental health issues themselves and aren't always making the best decisions about their finances. So we work with them to set up an individualized budget based on what they get from Social Security or any other streams of income. And we always focus on making sure that their basic needs are met first. So we pay for their housing, their utilities, food, things of that nature. And then we always try to set aside a little bit of money for their own spending, every week. Then we also provide guardianship, power of attorney services. So we work with the Berks County courts. We work with the Area Agency on Aging, as well as the County MHDD office, and are sometimes appointed to be guardian of person, estate, or both for individuals who are declared incapacitated. Some of them are because of mental health issues, and then some of them are because of Alzheimer's, dementia, or natural aging sorts of issues.
Okay. So it seems like a wide breadth of services that you're providing. Where do you see the greatest need in your service population?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, one of the things that we kind of pride ourselves on here is that we sort of fill gaps in services. So we'll start to get phone calls about, individuals looking for a certain type of support group, or maybe they are, guardianship was one of them. The Office of Aging was looking for someone to start doing guardianship work because they were no longer going to do it themselves internally. And so they reached out to us. I think one of the biggest gaps in service in the mental health community in general is probably just being able to access needed service. I think that's been kind of historically a problem and continues to this day. There's long waiting lists sometimes to get in, especially if you need medication, if you need to see a psychiatrist or a prescriber. Services for kids, I think, is becoming a growing sort of gap in the community because more and more kids are struggling with some mental health issues. I think part of that is because awareness has increased, when we're identifying it and getting kids help sooner, which is fantastic. But then along those same lines, there's only so many providers in a community, and you have issues where this provider accepts this insurance but not another. And so where do you go if you have Medicare and there's no therapists there, or 3 therapists in Berks County who accept Medicare? You're going to wait a long time. So I think that's one of the biggest gaps that we see in the Berks County community.
Is that true that those on Medicare have a very hard time finding a therapist?
We have found that to be true. There's only a limited number of therapists who accept Medicare insurance. And therefore it becomes really tough for, a lot of times those are older folks or people who have a permanent disability. And it's hard for them sometimes to find someone who will accept Medicare, who doesn't have a long waiting list.
That's and that's disappointing to hear because as you identified, a lot of the people on Medicare are either older or have a disability that would be more likely to need to access those services. So and likely don't have a lot of disposable income to be able to pay for it out of pocket.
That's right. That's right. That's another big, a big hurdle for a lot of folks, even copays. I've talked a lot with different people in the community about the fact that it's kind of really a shame to me that insurance is structured in such a way that some families might have to decide between buying groceries that week and going to their therapy appointment because they have a $50 or $70 copay. For some families that makes a huge difference. And so of course, most people are going to, choose going to the grocery store to buy groceries versus their hour therapy appointment where they have to pay $70. So I think there's a lot of work that could be done, from and that we're talking about obviously a much
Yes.
broader problem than just Berks County here. But I think it's a shame to me that mental health services come at a cost. So
No, and I agree because particularly because therapy is not, it's not like your general practitioner where you're going once every year or every 6 months. I mean,
right,
for therapy, some people might go 2 or 3 times a week. Some people might go every week or every other week. So
right.
now when you have a $75 copay, it becomes prohibitive.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. It's not so bad if you go to urgent care once in a while and have to pay your $30 copay to get your
Right.
antibiotics. But you're right. When you're talking about something like weekly therapy or even therapy, twice a month can become cost prohibitive for people who are, especially if you're on a limited budget.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just and I'll be honest, I had no idea that there was such a gap with Medicare coverage
Yeah.
on those services.
Yeah.
So that's certainly an area that, hopefully, you know, can be addressed because that's, I'm sure, creating a huge hurdle for your population and getting the needed services that they need.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Now, uh, you mentioned that you do some advocacy with school districts. Can you talk a little bit more about that looks like?
Sure. So if families in any of the Berks County school districts have a child who is requiring services or already has an individual education plan and IEP, and they're just not really happy either with the way the school is handling something or they feel that their child should be getting something in addition. There's a variety of reasons someone might come to us for some advocacy. They can either self-refer themselves. Sometimes the school districts will actually call us as well. And we do have a waiting list for that service, but once you get assigned to an advocate, then they'll work with your family. They read all of the evaluations, all the paperwork that comes from you or the school district in regards to your child, and kind of take a look at what the school is providing, what was recommended by the professionals who might have assessed your child. And then they work cooperatively. And I think that's the most important term. And, if you take one thing away, our advocates are not adversarial. And I should also clarify, they are also not, they're not lawyers. So they're not, they don't get into any sort of legal battles with the school districts either. They can make referrals to some educational law attorneys, but they work cooperatively with the families and the schools. And, they will go to your IEP meetings. They will have discussions with the school about what they might think is lacking or some possible alternatives to make it better for not only the school district, but obviously for the child, who is the main focus of that service. We want those kids to be successful at school. We want them to be able to be mainstreamed as much as possible. And so that's generally what their role is. And it's also important to note that, they want to be able to teach parents to advocate for themselves as well. That we don't want to be involved in your child's life until they go off to college.
Right.
We want you to be able to develop some skills to be able to work with the school district and be successful with your child for the rest of their educational career.
And do you only work with students who have, a diagnosed mental health issue or really any student with an IEP?
Any student with an IEP, they can have physical disabilities, emotional, behavioral, anything that kind of fits under the special education realm.
Okay. Okay. And is there a fee for that service, or is that complimentary?
No, there are, if a
Okay.
parent qualifies for SNAP benefits, through the county assistance office, generally then your services are at no cost. They're funded through the United Way. But other than that, we have some fees established depending on, the hourly fees and depending on how many meetings we're going to and things like that. And that's something the educational advocate can discuss with the parents when they,
Yeah.
make it up the waiting list and finally get assigned to someone.
No, that makes sense because it's a lot of work, you know, those reports are fairly dense.
Yes, yes. Just reading some of those evaluations and stuff, takes quite a lot of time. So you are correct. It's a lot of work.
Yeah, and they have a very specific structure to them that doesn't always make a lot of sense. So,
Right, right. They know far more about the special education system than I do, and
yeah.
I still sometimes they're talking about things, and I just look at them and I'm amazed at the work that they do and the knowledge base that they have. So.
Yeah. Now you also said that you work a lot with some individuals with essentially with substituted decision making. Now you talked about Social Security and being a representative payee, guardianships, powers of attorney. I mean, how long has the Mental Health Alliance been involved in those type of services?
Oh my goodness. So, well, Greater Reading Mental Health was originally established in 1955, so we've been around a very long time. And educational advocacy was actually one of the first services that we provided. Representative payee has been going on for probably over a decade at this point.
Okay.
Guardianship is a relatively new service. That one we started officially in like 2021, I believe. So.
Okay. And have you seen a lot? I imagine you've seen a lot of need for those services. I mean, on average, how many cases are you managing?
With guardianship or power of attorney services, I think we're almost at the 50 mark. We have about 50 people thus far that we're guardian for or power of attorney for. And with rep payee, I would think we're well over probably 75 or so. So there's definitely been an uptick in representative payee referrals and guardianship referrals. We get those pretty steadily as well. From the Area Agency on Aging, especially. It seems like there's a growing number of elderly individuals in our community who just either have or are estranged from their families and don't have a good family relationship anymore, or actually just don't have any family, just never married, never had children, don't have siblings alive anymore, and so they don't have anybody who can step in. Family is always ideal, if you can have a family member serve as your substitute guardian, but we're happy to be able to provide that service for individuals who don't have that.
And are you finding that most of the population that you're working with is elderly, or there's a lot of them that they're younger but have mental health issues?
I would say in the guardianship program, the majority of them are elderly and are suffering from, cognitive deficits related to Alzheimer's and dementia. They might, and a lot of them did have co-occurring mental health. When they were younger, they had some mental health issues that, obviously continue into your adulthood and your older years. I would say that it's probably a 75-25 split, that, the 25 being younger individuals who just have such significant mental illness that they're never going to be able to make decisions on their own.
And what types of mental illness are you seeing that is sort of requiring these type of services?
I think with the younger population, the majority of them are diagnosed as schizophrenic, who need guardianship services, and then of course they have some co-occurring. They might have bipolar diagnoses on top of those, but generally they're the real significant ones, like schizophrenia, that they've had since they were young adults. Generally for most of them, what we've seen is that they did have family, when they were in their 20s and 30s, they had family members who took care of them and kind of served in that capacity. And then as those individuals, either aged or passed away, now you have a 40, 50-year-old individual who is still schizophrenic, but doesn't have any family members left. So we generally end up with guardianship of them.
And what do the symptoms of schizophrenia look like?
Well, obviously that can be a little bit different for everybody. If you
Right.
have an unmedicated individual, then you're looking at individuals who generally the biggest one is that they're responding to internal stimuli. So those are individuals who are having hallucinations, whether they're visual or auditory. They're talking to what appears to be talking to themselves, talking to someone who isn't there. Just as examples from my work in a former career, I worked part-time also at Tower Health in the emergency department doing mental health assessments. So you might have an individual who, you're having a conversation with, the next thing you know, they're looking up like this and asking you, do you see that? Because they're seeing things that aren't there. Many of them are very highly paranoid. They might think that people are after them, coming to get them, that they're being followed, that someone's poisoning their food. So they're really sort of stuck inside, those internal processes that are going on in their own minds. I think you often will find a lot of them in the homeless population as well, because they can't trust anyone, so they don't often access services. And it's a very difficult, that is a very difficult mental illness to cope with. A lot of them don't like being on medication. They don't like the way medication makes them feel. So for some of them, once they've been on medication for a while and the hallucinations have stopped, they don't like the side effects of medication, so they stop taking it, and the cycle, returns, because they are folks who generally need to be medicated for the rest of their life.
So how do you convince these folks who don't want to work or access services that they need the services that you're providing?
Yeah, that's tough. Luckily for us, the majority of them are already medicated and are generally in a living situation where there's some structure and someone's giving them their meds every day or watching them take their medication. So we're not chasing them down on the streets and trying to convince them to access service. We have one individual right now who is not happy with his current living situation, and so he has chosen to stop eating. And that's a real tough one. We're struggling with that one here because the only alternative to that would obviously be to put a tube into his stomach and feed him nutritionally that way. However, we also know that he might continue to pull that tube out, and then it will be a revolving door of, going back into the hospital and reinserting a tube. And so it actually can, it can be difficult for us too, as guardians, because we're supposed to be working in someone's best interests, but also considering what they themselves may want.
Right.
And so it can be a very difficult role to be in, which is also one reason why sometimes family members don't want to be responsible for those decisions. It's hard.
It's incredibly difficult, and particularly there, as I'm sure you're aware, there were some changes in the law that went into effect earlier this year to really emphasize the use the use of least restrictive alternatives, which has always been a part of the law, but I think was maybe glossed over a little bit more. And now the court is required to make specific findings when they're appointing someone of the least restrictive alternatives. But
Right.
as you just pointed out, I mean, it can be very, very tough to determine what is a least restrictive alternative to guardianship.
Yep.
And in some ways, I think the legislature picked the buzzword or the buzz phrase so that they could, to be able to say that they made a change. But
Sure.
with those like you have the boots on the ground. I don't know how you do that.
Yeah,
Like
it's very hard. I mean, I don't, there's no like golden ticket or easy answer, and everybody is different. There's so many times we get cases in and I read them, kind of read the background, and I think to myself, oh, this is going to be just like so-and-so's case. And then it comes in and I'm like, oh my God, this is nothing like so-and-so's case, because human beings, we're all individuals. Everything
Right.
is different, and we respond to everything differently. And so we kind of, there's a lot of internal dialogue that goes on here between those of us who work in the guardianship program and whatever providers an individual is working with. There's lots of them who are connected to providers in the community, and we're always attending their care meetings, their treatment team meetings, and trying to get the most information we can from the people who are treating these individuals to make the best decision possible for them, because it is hard. Sometimes we make some decisions and a little while later we still find ourselves sitting down saying, "Ooh, I don't know, was that, did we do the right thing?"
Was that the right choice? Yeah, no,
Yeah.
it is definitely difficult. And then in addition to guardianship, you serve as power of attorney for some
Yes.
individuals.
Yes.
And so one thing I know we talked about before we went on the air was sort of the difference between a durable general power of attorney and a mental health power of attorney. And so a mental health power of attorney is specific to allowing mental health treatment and decisions to be made by a substitute decision maker. And so do you work with folks in both capacities, both a general and a mental health power of attorney?
So, excuse me, in our program, the guardianship power of attorney program, those are generally general power of attorneys that we're dealing with.
Yeah.
In our peer support program, we do work with those individuals to create what's called a mental health advance directive, which kind of similar to an advance directive that you or I would fill out, talking about, do we want life support or not want life support? That mental health advance directive kind of outlines for us what that individual would want to happen in regards to their mental health care, should they not be able to kind of voice a decision on their own. We don't have anybody at this time that we are actual mental health power of attorney for. So.
And that may just be maybe related to the population that you're working with.
Right.
I know one area where can become critical is if someone wants ECT as a therapy. I don't know if you can explain a little bit about what ECT is.
Sure. ECT has been around for a really, really long time, actually. And I think it used to be feared by many, many people, because, you're going back to the days of, movies like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and things of that
So I was
nature,
thinking.
where, it was terrifying to be going through that. But I actually, as part of my graduate internship, I worked on an inpatient mental health unit. And part of that internship was to actually witness ECT being provided to patients. And I can attest to the fact that I saw remarkable changes in folks, especially folks who had major depressive disorders and things of that nature. When they went through ECT, it really does kind of just rewire your brain, and it made them feel much better. So it's basically a process of providing just electrical stimulation to the brain for a very, very short period of time. And I'm talking like a 2-second snippet of time. Individuals are given some medication to help them relax. A lot of them aren't even really terribly aware of what's going to go on. Kind of like if you or I went in for a colonoscopy or something like that. You're not quite that far out, but you're sedated. It's done by a psychiatrist. There's medical doctors, there's nurses there monitoring all your vital signs to make sure that you're doing fine, that you're tolerating everything, and you're kind of kept in a recovery area for a period of time to make sure that you come out of that sedation and that you're feeling fine and you're okay to either go home or back to your room or whatever the case might be for your specific situation. But yeah, ECT is, it's pretty remarkable what it can do for certain types of mental health issues.
And because of the stigma that's attached to it, in Pennsylvania, it's not necessarily the easiest thing to get, because as a guardian, you can't authorize it for someone. The court can't authorize it. The only person who can authorize it is the individual, which they might not have capacity,
Right.
or you can, from my understanding, authorize it in a mental health power of attorney, which is why that, in some cases that can become, very important.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so so it's just it's one of those little nuances in the law that, you know, from my end, it's a little fascinating that we haven't evolved further, but I guess maybe that's just the way that the world is.
Yeah.
Um,
And I think a lot of times when you're talking about laws in general, the folks making them are often not the people who are boots on the ground doing the day-to-day work and seeing how things play out and what's needed and, what makes the most sense. And so I think there's often a disconnect between, laws that are sometimes created and worded in such a way
right,
so that they feel good, and everybody's
right.
happy with it, so they pass. But then those of us who are on the receiving end of that and have to abide by those laws kind of look at them and say, what am I supposed to do with that? Like that contradicts this. And so, where do we go from there?
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, Wendy, just briefly, how did you get involved in the Mental Health Alliance?
Well, oh gosh, yeah. So very briefly, I mean, I myself have had an anxiety disorder. I often say from the time I was born, didn't realize it probably till I was in like middle schoolish or my early teen years. In hindsight, the majority of my family has anxiety related issues as well. So I've always had an interest in mental health. So, my first career out of college as a social worker was to get into public child welfare. I worked for almost 23 years for county children and youth. And, there was a lot of co occurring mental health and drug and alcohol problems in that population. A lot of times we were involved with folks because they had untreated mental health or drug and alcohol. And so that furthered my interest in mental health in general. And like I said, when I went on to graduate school, then I did my internship on an inpatient unit and ended up working part-time in the emergency room at Reading Hospital for, I think, about 13 years as well. So that's my background and kind of why I was always interested in mental health. And then, just got to a point where I was kind of a little burnout from child welfare, as I think a lot of
Yeah,
people quickly become, and I had hung in there quite a long time in the grand scheme of things. And so when this job became available, I took a stab at it and I decided, this is an opportunity for me to use my skills in a different way to really make more of a grassroots effort of helping people in the Berks County community.
that's wonderful. It sounds like a very nice career, and it's um, now if there's one thing about what you do that you don't think most people wouldn't know, what do you think that would be?
Oh boy, one thing we do that most people wouldn't know. That's interesting. I mean, I guess, people who know me personally know about my own mental health journey. But I think, the majority of people maybe in the professional realm that I work with might not know that. So that's one thing that a lot of people don't know about me. Um, and I think, that's one thing that I think is so nice about this job is that I get the opportunity to talk about my own personal experience and how that kind of got me to where I am and what that looks like. And that, I think that's one of the issues with mental health in general is that the stigma prevents you from talking about it.
Right.
And really, the best way to get beyond it is to talk about it. There,
And to get the treatment, and the
yes,
treatment is not just medication, it's therapy.
absolutely. And I
Eh,
mean, I did therapy. I will tell you, I did therapy from the time I was probably, oh, maybe 14 years old, on and off throughout my young adulthood. I mean, it probably wasn't until I was in even my early 30s until I finally was at a place where I was like, you know what, I don't really need to to be doing this anymore. I'm at a good enough point where I don't need that, but I always keep that option open.
right, right.
Yeah.
Because I think that the medication tends, in my opinion, works the best when you have therapy going along with it. Now, of course, you get to a point where you're managing it to a point where you don't need that, of course. But
Right.
right now, if any of our listeners want to help or support the Mental Health Alliance, what's the best way to do that?
If anybody is just interested in getting involved, they can email us at info, I-N-F-O, at grmha.org. And they can also find us on Facebook, and we also have a website that we try to keep updated as often as possible with new events that are happening in the community and that we're hosting here as well.
And if they need any of the services, they would contact you the same way?
Absolutely. Yes. We're always here to help. We not only do the services that I talked about, but we also help link people to other services in the community. Sometimes people just don't know where to start, and we're happy to take those phone calls or emails and get back to you and kind of help walk you through those process.
Oh, wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Wendy, for joining us here today to talk about the Greater Reading Mental Health Alliance.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it.